You ever have one of those mornings where everything feels normal, right up until somebody tells you your own front porch doesn't belong to you anymore? That's exactly how this whole mess started for me. And if you told me it would end with federal survey crews, a courtroom packed wall to wall, and a homeowners association writing me a settlement check with more zeros than I'd ever seen, I'd have laughed right in your face. But sometimes the truth is stranger than anything people make up. And this one still doesn't feel real, even after everything that happened. If you're the kind of person who believes common sense still matters, and that ordinary folks deserve a fair shot when powerful people start making up their own rules, stick around. Because this story takes some turns I never saw coming. My name's Ethan Brooks, and my family has owned Cedar Hollow Farm outside Redstone, Tennessee for almost 70 years. It isn't fancy. Never was. We raise cattle, cut hay, fix our own fences, and wave at everybody who drives past. My grandfather used to say land isn't something you really own. You're just borrowing it from the next generation, so you'd better leave it better than you found it. I tried to live by that. For years, the only sounds I woke up to were birds, tractors, and the old windmill creaking whenever a storm rolled in. Then developers arrived. At first, nobody minded. Folks figured another subdivision meant more customers for local businesses, maybe better roads, maybe a few more families moving into town. They called it Willow Crest Estates. Nice entrance sign, stone walls, decorative fountains, expensive homes with perfect green lawns that looked like nobody had ever walked across them. I figured we'd stay good neighbors. Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. The first sign something wasn't right showed up 6 months after construction finished. I was repairing a section of fence near my eastern pasture when 3 golf carts rolled straight across my hay field. Families were laughing, kids tossing footballs, people acting like they were driving through a public park. I climbed over the fence and waved them down. "Morning, folks," they smiled. "Beautiful trail you've got here," I frowned. "Trail." One woman pointed toward a wooden map installed near the subdivision entrance. "The Community Nature Trail. It goes all the way around the lake." I looked where she pointed. There was my pasture, my fence, my pond. Apparently somebody had printed them on a glossy brochure and labeled them Community Recreation Area. I honestly thought it was a mistake. "Sorry," I said politely, "this isn't public property." Their smiles disappeared. A man wearing expensive hiking boots folded his arms. "Our HOA newsletter says this entire greenbelt belongs to the neighborhood." "It doesn't," he shrugged. "That's not what management told us." They eventually turned around, but not before one of them muttered loud enough for me to hear. "Some country people just don't like sharing." I stood there watching them leave, telling myself somebody in the sales office had made a printing error. I wanted to believe that. 3 days later, somebody cut my fence. Not accidentally, clean cuts. Wire rolled back just enough for people to walk through. That evening, I repaired it. Next morning, it was cut again. That's when I installed cameras, not because I wanted trouble, because something about the whole thing felt organized. The answer came the following Saturday. I was loading feed when a black luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. Out stepped a woman who looked like she'd never had dirt on her boots in her life. Perfect white jacket, designer sunglasses, leather portfolio tucked under one arm. She smiled without actually smiling. "Mr. Brooks." "That's me." "I'm Vanessa Caldwell, president of the Willow Crest Community Association." She extended her hand. I didn't take it. "What can I do for you?" She glanced around my barn like she was inspecting a storage unit she'd already purchased. "I'm here regarding several violations." I laughed. "Violations?" She opened her folder. "Unauthorized fencing, agricultural equipment visible from community property, livestock creating excessive odor, and obstruction of recreational access." I stared at her. "I'm sorry, recreational access." "Yes," she pointed toward my pasture. Our residents have reported repeated interference while using the community walking trail. I actually looked behind me to see if she was talking to somebody else. Then I realized she was serious. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "there isn't any community trail." "There absolutely is." "No, there's my cattle pasture." She smiled again. "Our legal department disagrees." Something cold settled in my stomach. Not anger. Confusion, because people don't usually say something that ridiculous unless they honestly believe it. "Who told you this land belongs to your HOA? Our development documents." "They're wrong." She closed the folder. "I suggest you remove these fences voluntarily before enforcement begins." I looked across 200 acres. My grandfather had worked with a mule before tractors ever reached this county. "These fences have been here longer than your subdivision. They're still non-compliant." I couldn't help laughing. Non-compliant with what? Community standards. I took one slow breath. "Vanessa, your community starts at that stone entrance half a mile away." She shook her head. "Our master plan extends significantly farther." "No, it doesn't." "It does." "No." For a few seconds neither of us spoke. The breeze pushed through the oak trees. Cattle wandered toward the pond. Everything around us felt peaceful. Except the woman standing in my driveway trying to explain that I'd somehow violated rules written by people I'd never agreed to live under. She finally reached into her folder and handed me a bright yellow notice. "Failure to comply within 10 business days may result in legal action." I glanced at the paper. $5,000 in fines. For fencing my own pasture. I looked back up. "You know what worries me?" She raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The fact you seem absolutely convinced you're right." Her expression never changed. "Because I am." She climbed back into her SUV and drove away without another word. I watched the dust settle behind her tires, then looked down at the violation notice again. Most people would have crumpled it up and thrown it away. I almost did, but something stopped me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the threat. It was the confidence. Vanessa hadn't been bluffing. She genuinely believed she had authority over land my family had owned since long before anyone dreamed up Willow Crest Estates. And confidence like that doesn't come from imagination. It comes from paperwork, which meant somewhere, somehow, somebody had created documents that completely rewrote reality. I folded the notice, slipped it into my pocket, and walked into my grandfather's old office. In the back corner sat a dusty fireproof cabinet nobody had opened since Dad passed away. If there was an answer, I had a feeling it was waiting inside. The next morning I unlocked my grandfather's old fireproof cabinet with a key that hadn't been used in years. The hinges groaned like they were waking up from a long sleep, and a faint smell of old paper, leather, and machine oil drifted into the room. Grandpa always believed important things belonged on paper, not inside computers that could disappear with one bad lightning strike. He kept everything. Deeds, surveys, handwritten agreements, even faded photographs of fence lines from the 1960s. At the time, I thought he was just stubborn. Standing there that morning, I started wondering if he'd been preparing someone for a fight he knew would eventually come. I spread everything across the dining room table, coffee growing cold beside me while sunlight crept through the kitchen window. About an hour later, I found something that made me stop breathing for a second. It wasn't the original deed. I'd seen that plenty of times. It was a folded survey map with a handwritten note across the bottom in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. "Never surrender easement rights without independent survey." Developer asked twice. Declined both times. I read the sentence 3 times before it really settled in. Developer asked twice. Declined both times. So somebody had tried to get part of this property years before Willow Crest Estates ever existed. My phone buzzed before I could think any further. It was my neighbor, Sam Holloway. "Ethan, you home?" Yeah, don't leave, you need to see what's happening. 5 minutes later, his old pickup bounced into my driveway. Sam climbed out without his usual smile. Take a ride with me. We drove less than half a mile before I understood why he'd called. At the subdivision entrance, a brand new wooden kiosk had gone up overnight. Large, colorful maps showed jogging paths, picnic areas, scenic overlooks. And right there in bright green was my east pasture labeled Willow Crest Community Nature Preserve. I stared at it for several long seconds. Well, Sam muttered, guess they promoted your ranch without asking. I walked up to the sign and traced the printed property lines with my finger. They weren't even close. Whoever designed this map had swallowed nearly 30 acres of my land and simply colored it green as if ownership worked like a coloring book. A young couple pushing a stroller stopped beside us. Beautiful trail, isn't it? The husband said. We're excited to explore it this weekend. I looked at him and couldn't even blame him. He wasn't lying. He'd paid good money to buy a house based on promises someone else had made. I'm sorry, I told him, but that trail doesn't exist. His smile faded. It's on the map. So are unicorns sometimes. He laughed awkwardly, unsure whether I was joking. Before anyone could say another word, another luxury SUV rolled into the parking area. Vanessa Caldwell stepped out, perfectly dressed again, holding the same leather portfolio. She noticed me immediately. Mr. Brooks, morning. I see you found our updated community information board. Interesting artwork. She folded her arms. It's an accurate representation of the neighborhood. I pointed toward the giant green section covering my pasture. That's my family's land. According to our planning documents, it serves as shared green space. Planning documents aren't deeds. Her smile tightened. That opinion will be addressed through the proper legal channels. Opinion, I laughed quietly. Ownership isn't an opinion. Several residents had stopped walking now. People always slow down when they sense an argument coming. Vanessa noticed the audience too. She raised her voice just enough for everyone nearby to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, we're simply addressing a resident who has unfortunately misunderstood community boundaries. That sentence hit me harder than any insult could have. She wasn't talking to me anymore. She was shaping a story. If enough people believed it, facts wouldn't matter until someone forced them to. I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. Tell them something, Vanessa. Tell them you've personally seen the recorded deed. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Our attorneys have reviewed all necessary documentation. That's not what I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked back toward her SUV, leaving residents whispering behind her. Sam watched her leave before quietly saying, "She dodged that one." "Yeah," I replied. Because she doesn't actually know. That realization changed everything. Until then, I'd assumed Vanessa was leading the deception. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe somebody had lied to her too. Maybe she'd inherited bad information and built her authority on it for years. Or maybe she discovered the truth long ago and decided protecting the HOA mattered more than admitting a mistake. Either way, somebody knew exactly how this started. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office. The same brick building had stood there longer than I had. Mrs. Evelyn Carter was still behind the front counter, reading glasses hanging halfway down her nose. She looked up and smiled. "Well, Ethan Brooks, haven't seen you in a while. Wish this was a social visit." I handed her my grandfather's survey. "I need every document connected to Cedar Hollow Farm and Willow Crest Estates." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds expensive. Cheaper than losing 30 acres. Her expression changed immediately. "Give me an hour." While she searched, I wandered through old aerial photographs hanging along the hallway. One picture from 25 years ago caught my attention. There wasn't a subdivision anywhere in sight. Just open pasture, barns, and the creek winding across the valley. It reminded me how quickly people forget what came before them. An hour later, Evelyn waved me into the archive room carrying a stack of dusty folders. "You're going to want to sit down." I did. She opened the oldest file first. Original farm survey. Everything matched Grandpa's records. Then came developer applications from nearly 20 years earlier. Road permits, utility requests, environmental studies, nothing unusual, until she reached one thin folder tucked underneath everything else. She frowned. "I've never seen this before." It contained a color planning exhibit prepared during the subdivision proposal. Across the top, someone had written preliminary concept only, not for recording. The same green area that appeared on the entrance sign covered my pasture. "That's their map," I whispered. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes, but here's the problem." She flipped to another page. This concept was rejected. Rejected. County Planning Commission required revisions because these parcels weren't included in the approved development. My heartbeat sped up. So this version was never legal, not even close. Then why are they still using it? Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "That's a very good question." Before I could answer, another page slipped from the folder onto the table. It was a letter from the original developer addressed to my grandfather. Most of the ink had faded, but one sentence remained perfectly readable. "We remain interested in acquiring the eastern meadow should your position change. Offer respectfully declined." Grandpa hadn't just refused to sell. He'd protected the property before construction even started, which meant someone, somewhere along the line, had simply decided to pretend that refusal never happened. Evelyn looked at me over her glasses. "Ethan, if this subdivision has been managed using an unapproved planning exhibit instead of the recorded plat." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I understood exactly what she meant. This wasn't about one fake violation notice anymore. This wasn't even about my fence. If the wrong documents had guided the HOA for years, every rule they enforced along that boundary could be built on a mistake. Or something much worse. I carefully gathered every copy Evelyn printed, slid them into my folder, and thanked her before heading toward the parking lot. But just as I reached my truck, my phone rang. It was Sam again. His voice sounded tighter than I'd ever heard it. "Ethan, don't come home too fast." "Why?" "Because Vanessa's there." I gripped the steering wheel. "Doing what?" There was a long pause. Then he answered quietly. "She's standing in your front pasture with two men wearing survey vests. And they're driving stakes into your land." I started the engine before he even finished the sentence. The county papers were sitting on the passenger seat beside me, finally proving what my grandfather had known all along. But if Vanessa was putting survey markers in my pasture while I was gone, this fight had just crossed a line neither of us could walk back from. I don't remember the drive back to Cedar Hollow. I remember the sound of gravel spraying behind my truck, the steering wheel locked so tight my knuckles hurt, and one thought repeating itself over and over. If they're driving survey stakes into my pasture, they're either unbelievably confident or unbelievably desperate. By the time I turned onto my road, half the neighborhood had already gathered along the fence line. Sam was waiting beside my mailbox. "You made good time," he said. "What happened?" He pointed toward the pasture. "There." 3 men in reflective vests stood around a total station mounted on a tripod. Vanessa Caldwell stood beside them, holding a rolled-up blueprint and speaking into her phone. Nobody noticed me at first. I parked quietly and walked across the grass until I was only 20 feet away. "Afternoon," I said. Every head turned. Vanessa lowered the phone slowly. "Mr. Brooks, interesting place to hold a meeting." One of the surveyors stepped forward. "Sir, we're conducting a boundary verification." "Who?" He hesitated. "The Willow Crest Community Association." I handed him the county packet Evelyn had just printed. "Before you hammer another stake into my posture, you might want to read page 7. He glanced down, his eyes narrowed, he flipped another page, then another. Finally, he looked at Vanessa. "Ma'am," she crossed her arms, "continue." He didn't move. "I don't think we should." "What?" "This appears to be the recorded plat." "It is. And if that's accurate." He looked back toward my fence. "You're standing outside the subdivision." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Vanessa reached for the paperwork. She scanned the first page, then the second. Her confident expression cracked for the first time since I'd met her, not dramatically, just enough for me to realize something. She hadn't expected real records. She'd expected me to argue. Instead, I'd shown up with facts. One of the surveyors quietly packed away his equipment. "Leaving," he said. Vanessa spun toward him. "I hired your company. Our license depends on recorded documents, ma'am, not planning sketches." Within 5 minutes, every truck had pulled away. Vanessa stayed behind. For the first time, there wasn't an audience she could impress, just the two of us. "You could have called," I said. She stared across the pasture. "I inherited this board 3 years ago." "I know. I never questioned the documents." "Maybe you should have." She laughed once. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes people laugh when they realize they've spent years defending something that was never true. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. And now, she looked toward the entrance monument in the distance. "I don't know anymore." I nodded once. "Then find out." She walked away without another word. 2 weeks later, the county scheduled a public land review. Not a courtroom, not television. Just a crowded meeting room filled with homeowners, engineers, attorneys, and people who suddenly realized maps matter a whole lot more than assumptions. The county survey manager projected every recorded document onto a large screen. Original farm boundaries, approved subdivision plat, rejected planning exhibit. Every line matched exactly what Evelyn had shown me. Then came the surprise nobody expected. The original developer, now retired and nearly 80 years old, appeared voluntarily. His name was Harold Jensen. He leaned on a cane as he approached the microphone. "I think I owe everyone an explanation." The room became perfectly still. 23 years ago," he began, "my company designed several concept plans. One included part of the Brooks property, but Ethan's grandfather refused to sell." He smiled faintly. "Couldn't blame him. So we redesigned the project." He held up an old folder. "Unfortunately, somebody in our marketing department kept distributing the first concept map to real estate agents." Gasps echoed across the room. "We corrected it internally, but apparently not everyone got the message." The county commissioner leaned forward. "So the recorded subdivision never included Mr. Brooks' property?" "No, not 1 square foot." People started whispering throughout the room. Years of arguments, threats, letters, rules. All built on a marketing brochure that should have been thrown away decades earlier. No conspiracy. No forged deeds. Just one mistake that nobody bothered to verify because everyone assumed someone else already had. After the meeting ended, dozens of homeowners walked over to shake my hand. Some apologized. Some admitted they'd believed every HOA notice without question. Others simply thanked me for refusing to back down. One older gentleman smiled and said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. "The truth doesn't always win fast, but it sure walks farther than a lie." 3 months later, Willow Crest looked different, not because houses changed, because people did. The board voted unanimously to replace every outdated map. Every homeowner received corrected property information. The walking trail was rerouted onto actual HOA land. New signs went up thanking Cedar Hollow Farm for allowing seasonal educational tour for local schoolchildren. That part surprised everybody, especially Vanessa. She came out one afternoon while volunteers removed the old kiosk. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. You already did. No, I admitted I was wrong. She looked toward the pasture where a group of fourth graders were feeding calves under Sam's supervision. I'm apologizing for forgetting that communities are built on trust before they're built on rules. I smiled. My granddad used to say fences aren't there to keep good neighbors apart. They're there so everybody knows where to start respecting each other. She laughed. I wish I'd heard that 3 years ago. So do I, she offered her hand again. This time, I shook it. Not because we'd become friends, because sometimes the strongest ending isn't watching someone lose. It's watching people finally choose to do the right thing. These days, when I drive past the Willow Crest entrance, I still see families walking the trails. Only now they're walking where they actually belong. The fences are still standing. The cattle are still grazing. The old farmhouse still catches the evening sun exactly the way it did when my grandfather sat on the porch drinking coffee after a long day. Nothing about the land really changed. Only the story people believed about it. And maybe that's the lesson I carried away from all of this. Truth usually doesn't need the loudest voice. It just needs someone willing to keep showing up with patience, good records, and enough courage to stand on solid ground when everyone else insists you're standing in the wrong place. If this story reminded you that integrity matters more than intimidation, let me know what you think in the comments. Have you ever seen a dispute where assumptions caused more damage than facts? I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy stories about ordinary people navigating difficult conflicts with determination and common sense, I'd be glad to have you back for the next one.